The ancient scales that once gleamed like molten starlight now lay dull and cracked across Zephyron's massive form. Each breath came slower than the last, rattling through lungs that had witnessed the birth and death of countless civilizations. The dragon's golden eyes, once bright enough to rival twin suns, flickered weakly in the dim cavern that had become his tomb. For 3,000 years, Zephyron had been the last of his kind. The Great Silence had claimed all others, a mysterious plague that drained the life force from every dragon across the galaxy. One by one, they had faded into nothingness, their ancient songs growing quiet until only his voice remained. Now, even that was failing. The Galactic Council had tried everything. The brilliant Zentorian scientists with their quantum healing chambers, the mystic Vorthak priests with their soul-binding rituals, the cybernetic Nexus minds with their probability calculations spanning millions of scenarios. Nothing worked. The dragon magic was simply too alien, too deeply rooted in frequencies beyond their understanding. Another failure, honored Zephyron, whispered Dr. Kalani, the lead Zentorian researcher. Her crystalline features drooped with exhaustion. The harmonic resonators cannot match the wavelength. We are missing something fundamental. Zephyron's great head lifted slightly, sending dust cascading from his weathered scales. Child of crystal, your efforts honor the memory of my kin. But some mysteries are beyond the reach of pure science. My people's songs were born from the quantum foam itself, woven into reality before your species learned to see the stars. Ambassador Thrix of the Galactic Council stepped forward, his forearms gesturing in ritual respect. Great One, there must be something. The Council has devoted every resource to finding a solution. Your death would mean the end of the oldest continuous consciousness in known space. The knowledge you carry will die with me, as it should. Zephyron rumbled, though his voice carried deep sadness. The universe moves in cycles, Ambassador. Perhaps it is simply time for the age of dragons to end. The gathering of alien dignitaries stood in somber silence. Representatives from dozens of worlds had come to witness what might be the final days of galactic history's most ancient being. Each had brought their species' greatest minds and most powerful technologies, yet all had failed to halt the inexorable fading. In the far corner of the vast cavern, barely noticed by the assembled crowd, a small human boy sat cross-legged on the stone floor. Tommy Chen was only 12 years old, the son of a minor diplomatic aide who had been brought along on the mission. While the adults conducted their grave discussions and complex experiments, Tommy simply listened. He listened to the subtle harmonics in Zephyron's breathing, to the way his voice created echoes that seemed to bend reality itself. Humans were newcomers to the galactic stage, having achieved faster-than-light travel only 50 years ago. They were considered pleasant enough but unremarkable, no natural psychic abilities like the Vorthak, no crystalline computational matrices like the Zentorians, no hive mind efficiency like the Nexus. They were just human. Average in most ways, with a peculiar talent for getting along with almost everyone, and an odd tendency to form emotional bonds across species lines. Tommy had been coming to the cavern every day for 2 weeks, ever since his father's diplomatic mission had arrived. While the scientists worked with their instruments and the mystics chanted their incantations, the boy simply sat and listened to the dragon's stories. Zephyron seemed to enjoy the company of someone who asked for nothing more than tales of ancient worlds and forgotten wonders. Tell me again about the singing moons of Andromir, Tommy whispered, as the latest group of experts packed their failed equipment. Zephyron's eyes brightened slightly. Ah, young human. You remember that tale? They were 7 moons that orbited a crystal planet, each one tuned to a different note in the grand symphony. When the solar winds struck them just right, they would sing together in perfect harmony. It was said their music could heal broken hearts and mend shattered souls. What happened to them? Tommy asked, though he already knew the answer. They fell silent when my people began to fade. All the great songs of the universe are connected, little one. When enough voices disappear, the music itself begins to die. Tommy frowned, a thought tickling the back of his mind. For days, he had been humming fragments of melody that seemed to come from nowhere. His mother had always said he had perfect pitch, that he could reproduce any song after hearing it just once. But these melodies were different, older somehow, like half-remembered dreams. "Zephyron," he said carefully. "What if the songs aren't really gone? What if they're just sleeping?" The dragon's great head turned toward the boy, ancient eyes focusing with sudden intensity. "What do you mean, young singer?" "Well, when my grandmother had Alzheimer's, she couldn't remember new things. But sometimes, if someone sang her a song from when she was little, she would remember everything. Her eyes would get bright, and she would sing along like she was young again." A profound silence fell over the cavern. Even the departing scientists paused, sensing something significant in the air. "The forbidden melodies," Zephyron whispered, his voice barely audible. "But they were lost when the great library of Draconis fell. No one alive knows the ancient songs that birthed dragonkind." Tommy stood up slowly, his young face serious beyond his years. "Maybe someone alive doesn't need to know them. Maybe the songs are still here, waiting for someone who can hear them properly." He began to hum, and the sound that emerged was nothing like anything the assembled beings had ever heard. It wasn't quite human, but it wasn't entirely alien either. The melody seemed to wrap around the crystalline formations in the cavern walls, creating harmonics that made the air itself shimmer. The Zentarian instruments started registering impossible readings. The Vorthok mystics gasped as they felt dimensional barriers fluctuating. But most importantly, Zephyron's scales began to glow with the faintest hint of their former radiance. "Impossible," breathed Dr. Kalani, her readings spiking beyond calibration. "The quantum resonance patterns. They're matching frequencies we've never seen before." Tommy's humming grew more confident, more complex. Somehow, without training or technology, he was finding the mathematical poetry that had eluded the greatest minds in the galaxy. His human brain, unremarkable by most measures, possessed something the others lacked: the ability to feel music not just as sound, but as emotion, as memory, as hope itself. "Child." Zephyron's voice was stronger now, filled with wonder. "How can you know the song of first awakening? It has been silent for millennia." Tommy paused in his humming, looking up at the great dragon with innocent confusion. "I don't know it. I'm just listening to what's already here." "Can't you hear it too? It's everywhere in this cavern, like echoes that never quite faded away." The boy resumed his humming, and this time other voices began to join him. First, Zephyron, his ancient throat producing harmonies that made the stone walls resonate like cathedral bells. Then, impossibly, other voices seemed to emerge from the very air itself. The ghostly echoes of dragons long dead, their songs preserved in the quantum structure of the cavern itself. For the first time in 3,000 years, Zephyron's eyes blazed with true fire. His scales brightened from dim bronze to brilliant gold, and his massive wings stirred for the first time in centuries. The life force that had been slowly draining away began to flow back, pulled by melodies that spoke to the fundamental frequencies of dragon existence. "The boy," Ambassador Thrix whispered in awe. "The human boy is saving him." "Ah," but Tommy wasn't done. As he hummed, he began to understand something profound about the nature of dragon magic. It wasn't just about the right frequencies or the correct harmonic progressions. It was about connection, about the willingness to truly listen, not just with ears, but with heart and soul. Dragons were beings of pure song, and their magic required not just technical precision, but emotional truth. "There are more songs," Tommy said, his eyes wide with realization. "So many more. They're not just in this cavern. They're everywhere dragons ever lived. The songs are still there, waiting for someone to remember how to hear them." The gathered aliens stared at each other in stunned amazement. The greatest crisis in galactic history, the impending loss of the last dragon, was being solved by a 12-year-old human boy, armed with nothing but curiosity and an innate understanding of music that transcended species barriers. Dr. Kalani's instruments were recording everything, but she knew that no amount of scientific analysis would truly explain what was happening. This wasn't just about sound waves and quantum frequencies. This was about something uniquely human, the ability to bridge gaps between different forms of consciousness, to find common ground where none seemed to exist. "Zephyron," Tommy said, his voice filled with excitement. "I think I know how to find the other dragons. The ones who faded away. What if they're not really gone? What if they're just lost, like your grandmother when she couldn't remember, but the memories were still there?" The dragon's great eyes widened as understanding dawned. "You believe they can be called back? That the great silence was not death, but merely forgetting?" "I don't know for sure," Tommy admitted, with the honest uncertainty of a child. "But the songs are telling me something. They're saying that dragons can't really die as long as the music remembers them. And I think I'm starting to remember." Around the cavern, the assembled representatives of galactic civilization watched in wonder as the most ancient being in known space was saved by the newest, youngest species to join their ranks. None of them fully understood what they were witnessing, but all of them sensed that this moment would be remembered for millennia to come. The age of dragons was not ending after all. Thanks to one human boy's willingness to listen with his heart instead of his mind, it was about to begin anew. 3 days after Tommy's first breakthrough with Zephyron, the boy stood at the center of what had become the most important scientific endeavor in galactic history. The cavern bustled with activity as researchers from every major species worked to understand and replicate what the human child had accomplished. Yet despite their advanced instruments and collective knowledge spanning thousands of years, none could explain how Tommy's untrained humming had achieved what their sophisticated technologies could not. "The harmonic patterns don't follow any known mathematical sequence," Dr. Kalani reported to the assembled team. Her crystalline fingers danced across holographic displays showing wave patterns that seemed to bend the laws of physics. "The boy's voice creates quantum resonances that shouldn't be possible with biological vocal cords." Tommy sat nearby, his legs swinging from a makeshift chair carved from dragon scale that Zephyron had shed decades ago. He looked small and ordinary among the towering aliens and their gleaming equipment, but his presence had changed everything. The dragon himself was noticeably stronger each day, his scales brightening, and his movements becoming more fluid. "I keep telling you," Tommy said with the patient exasperation of a child explaining something obvious to confused adults. "I'm not making the songs. They're already here. I'm just finding them." Ambassador Thrix's forearms gestured in frustrated confusion. "But where are they coming from? Our sensors detect no residual energy signatures, no quantum echoes that could preserve such complex patterns for millennia." Zephyron raised his great head, golden eyes twinkling with ancient amusement. "Perhaps, honored delegates, you are approaching this with the wrong assumptions. You seek to understand dragon magic through the lens of your own sciences. But what if the fundamental nature of music transcends the boundaries between consciousness and cosmos?" 1. The dragon's words sent ripples of excitement through the gathered scientists. The Vorthak mystics began chanting in their harmonic language, while the Nexus collective minds started processing probability cascades at unprecedented speeds. Tommy jumped down from his chair and walked to the cavern wall, pressing his palm against the smooth stone. "Zephyron, tell me about the Song of Distant Stars. I keep almost hearing it, but it's shy." "Ah, young singer. That is one of the most sacred melodies. It was used to call dragons home across vast distances, to let them know they were not alone in the infinite dark." Zephyron's voice grew wistful. "I have not attempted it in over 1,000 years. The risk of failure, of feeling that emptiness again. But what if it works?" Tommy asked, his young face earnest. "What if there are dragons out there who got lost and are waiting for someone to help them find their way home?" The implications hit the assembled gathering like a shockwave. If Tommy was right, if the great silence had been caused by dragons becoming disconnected rather than truly dying, then the boy's musical abilities might not just save Zephyron. They might restore an entire species. Dr. Kalani's instruments began registering massive energy fluctuations as Tommy pressed both hands against the cavern wall and began to hum. This time, the melody was different, more complex, layered with harmonies that seemed to emerge from the stone itself. The sound grew in volume and resonance, filling the cavern with music that felt both alien and hauntingly familiar. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Throughout the galaxy, on worlds light years away, dormant dragon sanctuaries began to resonate. Ancient crystalline formations that had stood silent for millennia started to emit low, thrumming notes. On the dead world of Draconis Prime, the ruins of the Great Library began to glow with ethereal light. But the most astonishing response came from space itself. Deep in the void between stars, something stirred. Ambassador, a Zentorian communications officer, burst into the cavern, his crystalline features blazing with excitement. "We're receiving signals from across the galaxy. Dozens of them, energy signatures matching ancient dragon frequencies. But they're moving. They're heading toward us." The cavern fell into stunned silence, broken only by Tommy's continued humming. His eyes were closed in concentration, his face serene despite the magnitude of what he was accomplishing. Somehow, this human child was reaching across space and time to call home the scattered consciousness of an entire species. "Impossible," whispered one of the Vorthak priests. "The quantum entanglement required for such communication. It would require power sources beyond our comprehension." Zephyron slowly rose to his feet, his massive form casting dancing shadows across the cavern walls. His scales now blazed with brilliant golden light, and his eyes held a hope that had been absent for centuries. "Not impossible, good priest. Simply beyond your current understanding of what consciousness truly is. The boy has discovered what we always knew, but had forgotten in our grief, that true connection transcends physical distance." Over the following hours, the communications array outside the cavern went wild with incoming signals. Dragon songs thought lost forever began broadcasting from every corner of the galaxy. Each voice was different, carrying its own story of isolation and survival. But all were responding to Tommy's call. The first to arrive was Skyweaver, a dragon of the Outer Rim who had been drifting in hibernation for over 2,000 years. Her iridescent blue scales caught the starlight as her massive form descended through the atmosphere, following the song that had awakened her from dreams of despair. Tommy ran outside to greet her, his face glowing with joy. "You came. I wasn't sure the song would reach that far." Skyweaver's voice was like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "Little singer, your call pierced the darkness that had swallowed my hope. How is this possible? You are not of dragon kind, yet you sing with the voice of the ancient ones. I don't really understand it myself," Tommy admitted. "But I think maybe that's why it works. I don't know enough to think it's impossible." Within days, dragons began arriving from across the galaxy. Each brought their own piece of the puzzle, their own fragment of the great songs that had once bound their species together. There was Ironwing, the Forge Singer, whose metallurgical magic had shaped the cores of a dozen worlds. Starwhisper, the Dream Walker, who could navigate the spaces between dimensions. Thornscale, the Lifebringer, whose songs could awaken dead worlds and fill them with green growing things. As more dragons gathered, Tommy's own abilities continued to grow. He learned to distinguish between different types of dragon song, to understand the subtle variations that marked each individual's unique voice. More importantly, he began to grasp the underlying principles that made dragon magic possible. "It's not just about the music," he explained to the fascinated scientists. "It's about believing that everything in the universe is connected. Dragons don't just sing to make things happen, they sing to remind the universe of connections that were always there but got forgotten." Dr. Kalani's instruments could barely keep up with the readings as Tommy demonstrated his understanding. By humming specific sequences, he could make crystals resonate, cause metal to reshape itself, and even encourage small plants to grow at accelerated rates. But unlike the dragon's instinctive magic, Tommy's abilities seemed to come from a place of pure curiosity and wonder. "The child approaches our art from a completely different angle," observed Thornscale, her emerald scales shimmering with approval. "Where we sing from centuries of knowledge and tradition, he sings from innocence and joy. Perhaps that is why he can reach places our voices cannot." The gathered dragons began teaching Tommy formally, sharing songs and techniques that had been passed down through their species for millions of years. But they quickly discovered that the boy learned differently than they did. Where young dragons spent decades memorizing complex harmonic structures, Tommy could absorb the emotional essence of a song and reproduce it perfectly in minutes. He doesn't just learn our music, Zephyron observed during one of their teaching sessions. He translates it. He takes our ancient songs and makes them more accessible somehow, more human. This observation proved to be crucial when the next challenge arose. Reports began coming in from across human space that other species were attempting to replicate Tommy's abilities with mixed results. The Zentorians had built harmonic amplifiers based on recordings of the boy's voice. The Nexus Collective had created algorithmic song patterns derived from dragon frequencies. The Vorthak priests had developed new meditation techniques inspired by Tommy's approach. Some showed promise, but none could achieve the same results. More troubling, several attempts had ended in disaster-overloaded crystal matrices, dimensional rifts, and in one case, a small moon that had been accidentally shifted out of its orbit. "They're missing the point," Tommy said when he heard about the failures. "They think it's about the sounds themselves, but it's really about the feelings behind the sounds. You can't just copy the notes and expect magic to happen." Ambassador Thrix brought the concerning reports to the Council of Dragons that had formed around Tommy's teaching sessions. "Great ones. Our species are eager to learn from what the boy has shown us, but we may be approaching this incorrectly. Should we restrict access to these techniques until we better understand them?" Ironwing's bass voice rumbled through the cavern. "The knowledge itself is not dangerous. It is the intent behind its use that determines the outcome. Perhaps we need to teach not just the songs, but the wisdom to use them properly." This led to an unprecedented decision. For the first time in their long history, the dragons chose to share their knowledge openly with the younger species of the galaxy, but they would do so under Tommy's guidance, using his unique ability to translate ancient wisdom into forms that non-dragons could understand and safely utilize. The boy from Earth, who had stumbled into galactic significance through simple curiosity and kindness, suddenly found himself at the center of the greatest educational revolution in cosmic history. Dragons who had hoarded their secrets for millions of years were now eager to teach, and species who had never dreamed of wielding such power were about to discover new possibilities for harmony with the universe itself. But as word of these developments spread throughout the galaxy, not everyone was pleased with the changes Tommy had set in motion. In the dark spaces between stars, ancient enemies of dragonkind began to stir, drawn by the growing chorus of dragon songs that now filled the cosmic airways. The boy who had saved the last dragon was about to face his greatest challenge yet. The silence came without warning, cutting through the dragon songs like a blade through silk. Tommy was in the middle of teaching a group of young Zentorian students when the music simply stopped. Every dragon in the cavern froze, their eyes wide with ancient terror. "No," Zephyron whispered, his newly bright scales dimming. "Not again. Not when we've come so far." The boy felt it too, a wrongness in the air, like a discordant note that made his teeth ache. But unlike the dragons, who seemed paralyzed by recognition and fear, Tommy's human mind raced to understand this new threat. "What is it?" he asked, though part of him already knew the answer would be terrible. Skyweaver's voice trembled like winter wind. "The Silence Weavers. We thought them myths, legends told to frighten young dragons, but they are real, and they have found us." Before anyone could ask for clarification, the cavern's communication array erupted with emergency signals from across the galaxy. The dragons who had returned home, the sanctuaries that had awakened, the sacred sites that had begun to sing again, all were under attack by entities that seemed to exist purely to consume music and hope. Dr. Kalani's instruments showed impossible readings as she tried to track the attackers. The energy signatures are their negative space, voids in reality itself. They don't register on our sensors because they're actively erasing the frequencies they encounter. Ambassador Thrix's 4 arms gestured frantically as reports flooded in. 17 dragon colonies have gone silent in the past hour. The attacks are coordinated, precise. Whatever these things are, they know exactly how to target dragon magic. Tommy watched the adults beings with centuries or millennia of experience dissolve into panic and confusion, but his human mind, trained by a species that had faced seemingly impossible odds throughout their history, began to see patterns where others saw only chaos. "They're afraid," he said quietly, and the cavern fell silent. Ironwing's massive head turned toward the boy. "What did you say? Young singer?" "The Silence Weavers. They're afraid of what we're doing. That's why they're attacking now, when dragon magic is coming back. They want to stop it before it gets too strong." Tommy's voice grew more confident as the pieces clicked together. "Bullies always attack when they think someone might stand up to them." Zephyron's eyes blazed with sudden understanding. "Of course. The Great Silence was not a natural plague, it was engineered. The Weavers have been systematically isolating dragons, cutting us off from each other until we forgot we were part of something larger." The revelation sent shockwaves through the assembled beings. If Tommy was right, then the near extinction of dragonkind had been the result of a deliberate campaign spanning millennia. And now that the dragons were reuniting, their enemies were making a desperate final strike. "But why?" asked Dr. Kalani. "What could they possibly gain from destroying dragon magic?" Tommy closed his eyes and listened to the strange non-sounds that seemed to emanate from the attacking entities. After a moment, his face grew sad with understanding that seemed far too old for his 12 years. "They're lonely," he said simply. "Really, really lonely. They've been alone for so long that they forgot what it feels like to be connected to anything, and when they hear the dragon songs, it hurts because it reminds them of what they lost." "You speak of them with compassion," Thornscale observed, her emerald scales rippling with surprise. "Yet they seek to destroy everything we've accomplished. My mom always says hurt people, Tommy replied with characteristic human directness. "Maybe they don't know any other way to make the pain stop." This perspective was so uniquely human that it left the assembled aliens speechless. Where other species might see enemies to be defeated or problems to be solved, the boy saw beings in pain who needed help. It was the same empathy that had allowed him to connect with dragon magic in the first place, the ability to look beyond surface differences and find common ground. "Little singer," Skyweaver's voice carried deep uncertainty. "The Silence Weavers are creatures of pure entropy. They exist to unmake the bonds that hold reality together. How can one show compassion to that which seeks only destruction?" Tommy stood up and walked to the cavern entrance, looking out at the stars where invisible battles were raging across the galaxy. "When I was little, I had night terrors. Really bad ones. I would wake up screaming, and nothing anyone said could calm me down. But my dad figured out that if he sang to me not happy songs, but sad ones that matched how scared I felt, I could start to feel better." The boy turned back to face the dragons, his young face serious but determined. What if the Silence Weavers aren't trying to destroy the music? What if they're trying to join it, but they don't know how? They've been alone for so long that the only song they remember is silence. The idea was so radical, so contrary to everything the dragons believed about their ancient enemies, that several of them began to object immediately. But Zephyron raised a massive claw for silence. "The boy's insight has proven true before," the ancient dragon rumbled thoughtfully. "And we have little to lose. Our defenses against the Weavers have always failed because we treated them as external threats. But what if they are not invaders, but refugees?" Tommy nodded eagerly. "That's it. They're not trying to hurt anyone on purpose. They're just scared and don't know how to ask for help. But I think I know a song that might work." Without waiting for permission, the boy began to hum. This melody was unlike any he had sung before, haunting, lonely, filled with the ache of endless isolation. It was a song of sympathy for beings who had forgotten how to hope. A musical hand extended into the darkness. The effect was immediate and terrifying. The cavern filled with a presence that made reality itself feel unstable. Shadows moved wrong, and the air tasted of forgotten dreams. Several of the aliens backed away in fear, but Tommy continued singing, his voice growing stronger with each note. Then, impossibly, something began to sing back. It was barely perceptible at first, a whisper of harmony that seemed to emerge from the spaces between atoms. But as Tommy's song continued, the response grew stronger, more confident. For the first time in cosmic history, a Silence Weaver was learning to make music instead of destroying it. The entity that materialized in the cavern was unlike anything they had ever seen. It existed as much in concept as in physical form. A living absence that had somehow learned to be present. When it spoke, its voice was the sound of wind through empty places. "Singer of the small flesh," it said, the words accompanied by harmonies that made the stone walls resonate. "You offer the gift of sound to those who know only quiet." Why? Tommy stepped forward without fear, his human courage astounding the watching aliens. Because everyone deserves to be part of the music, even if they've forgotten how to sing. The Silence Weaver's form flickered with something that might have been emotion. "We have consumed harmony for eons uncounted, believing it to be poison that burned our essence. But your song, it does not burn. It soothes the wound place where music once lived." Across the galaxy, the attacks on dragon colonies slowed, and then stopped entirely. Other Silence Weavers, hearing their companions' tentative harmony, began to approach the singing sanctuaries with curiosity instead of hunger. "This changes everything," breathed Ambassador Thrix. "If these entities can be taught to create instead of destroy, they will need patience," the Weaver said, its voice growing more melodic with each word. "We have forgotten much in our isolation, but the small singer's gift shows us that forgetting is not the same as losing forever." Over the following weeks, the galaxy witnessed something unprecedented. Former enemies learning to harmonize. The Silence Weaver's unique nature, their ability to exist in the spaces between reality, proved to be not a destructive force but a complementary one. When properly integrated with dragon magic, their presence created new dimensions of musical expression that had never before been possible. Tommy found himself at the center of this historic reconciliation, serving as translator between beings whose fundamental natures seemed incompatible. His human gift for empathy and understanding proved crucial in bridging the gap between creation and entropy, sound and silence. "You have done more than save dragons," Zephyron told the boy during one of their quiet moments together. "You have taught us that there are no true enemies, only beings who have lost their way." The boy smiled with the simple wisdom that had changed everything. "My grandmother used to say that there's no such thing as a stranger, just friends you haven't met yet." I guess she was right about the whole universe. As the combined songs of dragons and former Silence Weavers filled the cosmic airways, creating harmonies more beautiful than any heard before, the galaxy entered a new age. It was an age where differences were celebrated rather than feared, where ancient enemies could become unexpected allies, and where a human child's compassion had rewritten the fundamental laws of cosmic harmony. The final dragon was no longer fading. Instead, surrounded by returned family and newfound friends, Zephyron sang with joy that echoed across the stars, his voice joined by a chorus that spanned the spectrum from pure music to perfect silence. And at the heart of it all, a 12-year-old boy from Earth hummed along, adding his uniquely human perspective to the greatest symphony the universe had ever known. In the end, it wasn't advanced technology or ancient magic that saved the dragons and transformed the galaxy. It was something far more powerful and far more human: the simple belief that everyone, no matter how different or lost they seemed, deserved to be part of the song.